different conversation. Ah, thank you for whoever did that. I was supposed to do that and I didn't. Thank you. So early warning signs, some more myths, early elementary, letter reversals. Now, letter reversals are developmentally appropriate. Why? Because if I asked you what this is, you would say a pen. If I ask what this is, you would again say a pen. If I ask what this is, you would again say a pen. So that's a term that, that's a concept that children understand. So if that's the case, then why is it then that these are different things? Children aren't able to handle these being different things, but this, what happened to that? This, and this being the same thing until it depends, and don't get too hung up on the exact age, but boy, like second or third grade, if I have a kindergartner who does letter reversals, that's developmentally appropriate. If I have a first grader, developmentally appropriate. It's not a sign of, I would argue, abnormality until about maybe third grade. If you have a fourth grader reversing letters still, okay, that's a concern. But a kindergarten, first grader, no. Same thing with word reversals, inversions, all of these, transpositions, substitutions. Again, according to Piaget, they're and don't too hung up on the exact date because age, because that can vary. But I'm not worried about it unless it's a third, fourth, fifth grader doing it. Number, all these types of things. Impulsivity and prone to accidents. This is not a physical disability per se. I mean, it doesn't manifest itself that way, so that makes me nervous. Difficulty planning, awkward pencil grip, trouble learning to tell time, and poor fine motor coordination. Now, there are some early warning signs, things that if you see, these are pretty significant red flags. Maybe slow to add new vocabulary words. So when a kid now is in first grade and they learn a word and they don't retain it very well, that can be an indication of having a reading difficulty. Difficulty with rhyming. Remember the fundamental aspect of dyslexia is a deficit in the phonological process, it's phonological skill of reading. Rhyming, if we think of phonological awareness is knowing that, and I know I say some things that this is review. I'm sure all the school psychs, when I just went over the discrepancy model, we're doing this the whole time, but I feel the need to say these things. So phonological awareness is knowing that someone again asked, yes, you will get a copy of these slides, I promise. Phonological awareness is knowing that sentences are made of words and words have syllables, etc. And then it becomes phonemic awareness when it gets down to the individual sound. Phonemic awareness is knowing that words are made of individual sounds, you can manipulate them. So saying cat, if I take the k in cat and make it a b, and the kid says bat, that's phonemic awareness. Rhyming is kind of that bridge between the two. So if a child struggles with rhyming as a young child and really struggles to learn it, then that child is quite possibly at risk for developing a reading disability later. Now, I'm trying to decide if I want to have this conversation now or in a few minutes. I have found, we did a study that in an urban school and with kids for whom English is not their primary language, and we found that rhyming didn't predict later reading growth very well. So this thing about difficulty with rhyming in an urban district or a very poor district or kids for whom English is not their primary language, and you're testing them in rhyming in English, then that's less of a red flag. If they can't rhyme in their native language, that's a concern. Okay? So if you're worried about rhyming, ask them to rhyme in their native language. May have trouble learning the alphabet, numbers, days of the week, colors, shapes, etc. Difficulty telling or retelling a story in the correct sequence. Difficulty separating sounds into words. There it is. That's the other phonemic awareness ones. Separating sounds and blending sounds. At, and saying at. What word is that? Cat. If the kid struggles with those two things, those are excellent long-term predictors of reading difficulty. Unable to recognize letters in his or her own name is a pretty big red flag. Difficulty decoding single words, slow to learn the connection between letters and sounds. And then this one is, I think, probably one of the most important, a family history of reading or spelling difficulties. Out of all of these, that's the best predictor. Did the kid's immediate family, parents, etc., have difficulty with reading, learning to read, and spelling? If they did, there's a good chance the child will as well. And I bring that up and emphasize it for a couple of reasons, because it's a no duh, right? But I just finished a study, and it wasn't in Montana, but we looked at 120, I think it was 120, might be 180, but certainly at least 120 school psych reports for kids referred for a learning disability in reading. And we looked at the background information, and not a single one of them commented on that. Not a single one of them said parents had reading difficulties. Not a single one of them said no evidence of reading difficulties in the family. It was not mentioned at all in any of those reports. So I would really encourage you, if you're a person who's involved in diagnosis of reading disabilities and/or dyslexia, that you look at that and you report that. That in your background information, and I know sometimes that's a difficult question to ask, but it can be asked that way. You know, is there a history in the family of any reading problems? That's a little less personal than saying, well, did you learn how to read well? And put that in your report. Okay, I think that's a really important predictor of later reading problems. So there are early warning signs. If you see these things in kindergarten and preschool, first grade, these are reasons to be concerned. People are posting there again about getting copies of the slides, and someone said they want to listen and don't want to listen and take notes at the same time. So maybe when we take a break, because we'll take a break. Let's see, what time do we start? We'll take a break in probably half an hour or so, or pretty close to that. So maybe during that time period, I can problem solve a way to brainstorm a way to get this out to everyone, so you have it at least for half of the day. I guess I should have thought to get it to you ahead of time. I give it to my students ahead of time. I'm sorry I wasn't more thoughtful for you, but I will get it to you. All right, so let's come back to that point though about, we talked about the definition of dyslexia and early warning signs of dyslexia. Now let's talk about identifying it and why we see inconsistency with special ed. The federal regs are pretty clear about how to diagnose a learning disability. The federal regs clearly say there's these four things. Okay, in 2004, the federal regs came out in 2006, said that the state can prohibit the use of a severe discrepancy. So states can now say that no longer works. You're not going to allow to do that to identify a reading disability anymore. A state may not require the use of a severe discrepancy. So a state can tell you you can't do it. They cannot tell you you have to do it. States cannot tell you you have to do a severe discrepancy model. Must permit the use of a process that determines if a child responds to research-based interventions. We call that RTI. To implement interventions, I know Montana is an RTI state. I'll come back to that point in just a second, but that's where RTI came from, that one clause in the federal regulations, and may permit the use of other alternative research-based procedures. Now, Montana is an either-or state. Montana allows you to look at severe discrepancy or to look at RTI. They may not be identified as having a disability. Oh, I'm sorry, that's if it's not related to those exclusionary causes. So they explicitly state that you can use RTI or you can use severe discrepancy. And I want to be sure what they meant by severe discrepancy. So I followed up on that. And no, they mean severe discrepancy. I didn't put it in the PowerPoint print. They mean severe discrepancy. So severe discrepancy is allowed in Montana. They can't tell you you have to do it. But they have to allow RTI. That's in the federal regs. So they do allow RTI and they do allow severe discrepancy. So districts can decide according to the federal or state regs, state law. Now let's come back to dyslexia. How do you diagnose dyslexia? Well, there's not really I mentioned already, NICHD has a wonderful definition of it, and people tend to use that as to think about how to diagnose dyslexia. But really, one of the few ways we have to actually have criteria is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. And I want to point out that even that's not clear because they dropped the term dyslexia in this version of the DSM, first time ever. They now use specific learning disorder. So I'll caution you though, if you see a Vowel come in from a psychologist or something, an outside psychologist or psychiatrist or something, and they've tested the kid and they come to you and say they have dyslexia, I would ask them what criteria they used, because they didn't use the DSM. Because they did, they wouldn't use the word dyslexic. So if you ever get challenged but from outside school and saying, yep, this kid's dyslexic, or if you're a parent and they're identified a child as dyslexic, I would ask to be clear how they reached that conclusion. Because if they're using the DSM, then they're either using an old version of it, or they might be using something else. And some things do exist, but this is the one most commonly used. But they now say that it's a difficulty in one of the following areas for at least 6 months, despite extra help or targeted instruction. So they actually say in there, you've got to have extra help to be considered a dyslexic. So inaccurate and slow reading, understanding meaning of what's read, spelling, written expression, understanding, etc. Now remember, this is learning disorder, not dyslexia. I should say it more carefully again, because there are you could have a learning disorder in comprehension and spelling, by the way. It's quantifiably below the expected for age. Onset during school years. That's one thing I think is a bit unfortunate, but I kind of understand it. The DSM said you can't diagnose dyslexia before the kids start school. And the reason is it's tough to identify a kid as having a reading disorder until they're taught to know how to read. That doesn't mean there aren't signs we can look at in preschool. There aren't things we can do in preschool. Absolutely. I don't love the idea of not diagnosing before school, but I kind of get it. Because how do you identify reading disability if they haven't taught how to read yet? And I have some data I'll show you that kind of support that with kindergartners. So this is a specific learning disorder, not dyslexia. They don't use the term dyslexia anymore. The Montana law, part of the reason we're talking today, screening and intervention law, and I'm not going to read these to you because I'm assuming you're familiar with it more so than I, but basically says you have to screen to identify risk for not meeting grade level reading benchmarks, and there's some information about the screening. And then it says that you have to, so you screen through grade 2, and if they're low, you have to do an intervention. One thing I like that this law says, that you have to identify the specific needs of the child and implement best practice intervention to address those needs. I honestly think that's what most schools struggle with. They can identify kids who are struggling, although I think we have to do that better as well. But they don't do a good job usually of picking the intervention that matches what the kid needs. So we're going to get to that. We might start that conversation today, but certainly next week. So I argue that we should really do this through an MTSS process. Now, you'll notice I use the term MTSS instead of RTI. MTSS is basically a system. I argue these 3 points: the systematic use of assessment data, to efficiently allocate resources, to enhance learning for all kids. Okay, those 4 points: systematic use of data, to efficiently allocate resources, to enhance learning for all kids. That's what an MTSS is. In MTSS, in academics, reading, math, etc., is what we call RTI, response to intervention. MTSS for behavior, I don't refer to it, but I agree with this, is PBIS, positive behavior interventions and supports. And I don't have a sense of, because I don't do work in that area, a sense of how strong PBIS is in Montana. But I think the PBIS model is a wonderful MTSS approach. And if we could just pick that up and switch to reading, we would do really well. But I really think that the implementation of good screening, school-based screening, good interventions need to happen through a tiered model. So you hear me refer to MTSS a few times today and next week. And it's not because I'm trying to show how to do an MTSS model. I'm trying to contextualize what I think we should do within an MTSS approach, because I think that's the most effective way to do it. And we know the 3-tier model. I'm sure I can talk to you about what the 3-tier model is, but I do want to make a couple points. We know someone's saying Montana MBI, awesome, pretty strong in Montana. I'm so happy to hear that. I'll tell you, if I go to a school, and I've worked with, I mean, it's hard to say hundreds, but certainly over 100 schools for sure. And I'll tell you, if I walk in and they're doing PBIS, I know my job is going to be a lot easier to start an RTI model. And now MTSS is the umbrella under which both fall, which is great. And they really should be more integrated. I'm part of a federal grant that we're trying to figure out a system to really integrate those two systems, behavior and academics, into one MTSS, because that's the way it really should be run, because those two things are not different, are not unrelated, right? If a kid struggles with reading, they're going to have behavior problems. Kids with behavior problems struggle with reading. So we know, of course, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, more intensive. The higher up you go, the more intensive. The more intensive the need of the kid, the more intensive the intervention to match it. But a couple other things happen as well that we need to talk about. We collect data more frequently. Today we're going to talk about screening. And in an RTI framework, in tier 1, all we need 3 times a year: can read, can't read. That's all we need. Now, I'm sure any teachers listening to this are screaming at the monitor right now, saying, "Are you kidding me? I need a lot more data than that." I hope you're saying that. You're right. You're exactly right. I'm not talking about to drive instruction. I'm talking about systematic use of assessment data to efficiently allocate resources to enhance learning for all kids. 3 times a year, I need can read, can't read. Now, a smaller number of kids getting a tier 2 intervention, we're going to assess those kids probably every other week, certainly no less than once a month, and maybe once a week. And now I need to see can read, can't read, but can decode, understands what they read, has phonemic awareness. And in tier 3, now we're going to assess those kids certainly once a week. In fact, sometimes I assess those kids twice a week. And now I need to see can read, can't read, can decode, can't decode, but for what phonemes does the kid know the sounds? So to systematically allocate resources to enhance learning for all kids, our data have to be collected more frequently, and we have to be collected more precisely. Can read, can't read, can't decode, to can decode, can't decode, to phonemes, etc. Okay? And the reason we do that is so we could do more in-depth problem analysis. As you progress through the 3 tiers, you should be doing more in-depth problem analysis. All I need you to do in an MTSS model, I don't care if it's behavior, reading, math, whatever you want, answer these 3 questions. The primary problem analysis question for tier 1 is there a class-wide need? Is this a student problem? Is this a class problem? Is it a systems issue? That's question number 1. Is there a class-wide need? And that happens through screening. Question 2. What is the category of the problem? So once we identify a child as struggling, once we eliminate the class-wide need, then we look to see, okay, now we identify kids that are struggling, what's the category of their problem? Is it a decoding issue? Is it a fluency issue? Someone just mentioned high frequency words. Is that an indicator they struggle with sight word recognition at older grades? Yes. I hope I mentioned word recognition. Yeah, with older grades, kindergarten, first grade, of course, no, but older grades, yes, that can be a difficulty. So after we look at class-wide need, tier 2 is what's the category of the problem? Is it a decoding issue, a phonemic awareness issue, a fluency issue? And then lastly, tier 3, what's the causal variable? And I'm going to put this in the chat box. I don't know if the chat box is recorded or not, but I'm going to put this in the chat box. The causal variable is let's see how fast I can type this, environmental variable that we can control that is most closely related to the problem. Ooh, that was good. So the environmental variable we can control that's most closely related to the problem. This is tier 3. This is in-depth problem analysis. The problem is I see a lot of schools try to do this at tiers 1 and 2, and you can't do it. You don't have the resources. It won't work. You can't be successful. You have to first consider class-wide need and category of the problem. Without a good tier 1, you can't have a good tier 2. And without a good tier 2, you can't have a good tier 3. Let me tell you why I say that. I worked in a school that was in Minnesota, and they got what's called the Minnesota Reading Corps. The Minnesota Reading Corps is a group that's funded by AmeriCorps, and they fund volunteers to go out and work in schools. So it doesn't cost the school a dime. This is a wonderful program, by the way. If Montana could call the Minnesota Reading Corps and see how they do it and start that model in Montana, boy, it'd be awesome. They find usually it's college students, kids that just graduated from college, which I shouldn't call kids, sorry, students that just graduated from college, young adults, and they pay them next to nothing, but they pay off their student loans for them. And then they go and work in schools with kids and work one-on-one to do these highly scripted interventions. It's a wonderful program. Well, the school I worked at one day, they found out that they got approved to have Reading Corps next year, and they were excited. Of course they were. And they called me and said, "Hey, can we use this as our tier 2 intervention?" Oh my gosh, yes, great idea. But don't forget tier 1. Don't forget tier 1. So then what we found was at the end of the year, the principal called me because he just got his test score results. I'm making these numbers up. This is from memory, but it was roughly this. The previous year, 60% of the kids passed the state test in reading, which is not bad compared to most schools. This year, with all that work they did in Reading Corps, the number of kids that passed the state test went up to 63%. And the principal called me and said, "Really? We did all this and got 3%? It's because you didn't listen to me. I didn't say that, but I thought, no, okay, I thought that. Like, let's back up and let's look at the class-wide issues. Let's go back and work with our PLCs to develop class-wide needs, to look at good screening data, develop class-wide needs. Let that be the first step in treating those class-wide needs. Let that be the first step in this MTSS system to address student reading needs. So we did. We went back to the drawing board and we started all over again. We took their PLCs, professional learning communities, taught them how to do what I'm showing you today. The next year, remember, it went from 60 to 63%, and those numbers might be off one or two, but this next number is not. I remember this well. The next year, the number of kids who passed the state test went from like 63% to 78, and then over 80 from then on. Without good core instruction, nothing else matters. We can do all the best targeted, really targeted interventions at tier 2, and the kids might learn how to decode really well, but that's not contextualized within good balanced reading instruction. They'll learn how to decode, they won't learn how to read. I can't tell you how many times I've seen that, which is why it's so important to remember. And by the way, without a good tier 2, you can have a good tier 3. So if there's 500 kids in the class in the building, and we want 80% to be a good reader, and so we with class-wide need we make that happen. Let's say so now we got 20%, 100 kids, and that's how many schools out there only have 20% of kids with reading problems? But let's just use that number. So 20% out of 500 is 100. How many weeks are there in a school year? 34 or so, roughly. So if there's 100 kids, and most of the time in this causal variable conversation, that's done by the school problem-solving team. I don't know if you have problem-solving teams in your schools or not, but that's usually done by the problem-solving team. And they dive in really in-depthly and look at the data. So if your problem-solving team meets once a week and talks about 2 kids a week, which is fairly typical, that's only 68 kids. You've got 100 kids. You cannot have an effective problem-solving team without a good tier 2. Without a good tier 2, you can't have a good tier 3. Without a good tier 1, you can't have a good tier 2, which means without good core instruction, nothing else matters. Oops. And I've already made this point. RTI and PBIS are extensions of the same umbrella. So this all begins with screening. Screening for dyslexia, screening for reading problems. Before I can talk about screening, yes, data from those tiers. Now, when I talk MTSS, we're talking about database decision making, and we're going to do that. Well, actually, a perfect segue. Thank you, Carla. But we have to remember the 4 purposes of assessment. I'll put them out there, just talk. There are 4 reasons with an RTI, or with an intervention perspective, a diagnostic perspective, identification perspective that we collect data. You know, program evaluation, state test, I put that in there because I feel the need to do so. But I'm a reading interventionist primarily, and I'll go to a school and I'll take a kid that they're really struggling to work with, and I'll look at their data, and I've never once asked, what was his state test score? Now, I'm assuming he didn't do well, because if he didn't, if he did well, they're not calling me, but the state test tells me nothing to help this kid. I do find state test names hysterical. Here in Missouri, we call it the Missouri Assessment Program, which is super boring. In Minnesota, it was the Minnesota Comprehensive Assessment. But in South Carolina, the state test is called the Standards of Learning, which they abbreviate the SOL. And I'm not kidding. The state test in South Carolina is the SOL. In Utah, which is the best state test name in the country, it's called the Utah Performance Assessment of State Standards, which they call the UPass. And of course, all the kids call it the UPass. And the thing I find hysterical is, what committee didn't see that one coming? Of course, they call it the UPass. Anyway, so state test, I'll put it up there because I kind of feel the need to include it somewhere. But really, it's these next 3 that I really drive what I do. Screening. Screening is which kids are not meeting expectations and which kids need support. Diagnostic. Diagnostic is, once we identify a kid as struggling, what are their needs? What are their specific needs? And then lastly, monitoring progress. What does the student growth look like? The tool we use has to match the purpose for which we're using it. Has to be designed for that in order to do that. For example, screening, topic of today. There are lots of good screeners out there. STAR and NWEA MAP. I'll ask this question about which screeners you use in just a second, but STAR and NWEA MAP are both good measures. Now, I don't love them for younger kids. I'm not a huge fan of STAR early literacy. I think you can get the same data pretty well. Um, the STAR is a good screener for like second grade on, really third, fourth grade on. Same thing with NWA map. Really good screener, like fourth, fifth grade on. Middle school, high school, outstanding screeners. Ames Web, Dibbles, FastBridge, Easy CBM, those are those curriculum-based measurement approaches. Those are much better screeners for younger kids. For kindergarten, first grade, it's tough to beat letter sound, letter naming, and a phonemic awareness measure like phoneme segmentation fluency. Those are designed to be screeners. Diagnostic, and someone was putting this earlier. Yeah, I'm not a fan of map with younger kids at all. I don't want to speak that strongly, but I'm kind of not either. Fourth, fifth, sixth grade, middle school, high school, absolutely yes. It's one of the best graders that exist. But I think you can get those same data better with Ames Web, Dibbles, or FastBridge. Someone posted, oh, it went up, I can't see who it was. Diagnostics could be phonics screener, phonemic awareness. Yes, yes, yes. So once a child's identified as struggling, then you want to measure the specific skills. So you measure phonemic awareness, decoding, phonics, fluency, etc. That's how you get to those data. And so some of these measures, like oral reading fluency from Ames Web, Dibbles, and FastBridge, curriculum-based measurement for reading, CBMR, that's a great screener, great overall indicator of reading. It also is a direct measure of reading fluency. Nonsense word fluency. Oh, teachers push back on nonsense word fluency. I used to be the co-director of the Minnesota Center for Reading Research, and I am still a passionate reading person. And nonsense word fluency makes me cringe. It just drives me nuts because it's not reading. But remember, it's not supposed to be reading. The only way you can read those words is to sound them out. Use it as a way to determine if a child can decode. It does that fine. Now, my colleague Lori Hellman, who is my co-director at the Minnesota Center for Reading Research, she was from curriculum instruction. I was from Ed Psych, and she used to push back on kids for whom English is not their native language. Don't use nonsense words. And we debated it quite a bit. And I showed her the research around it and showed that it had the same reliability and validity. And she finally said, "You're missing the point. I don't care about the reliability and validity. I don't want to put a word that's in front of a kid who's not a real word for whom English is not their native language." So she finally made a point, and we studied it, and she was right. And I had to admit she was right, and that was very painful. But we developed instead, which I think is a great idea. And I'm going to show you these in a few minutes here, a list of low frequency phonetically regular words. So the words that the kids have never seen before, but they're real words. And we argue those are good screeners at this level as well. Not screeners, sorry, diagnostic tools. If a child identifies as a struggling reader, then so here I want really rigorous, well-researched. Here I have a little bit more flexibility. So using something that's like a nonsense word or a phonetically regular yet low frequency word, that'll work. Now, monitoring progress. Monitoring progress, we have to have a quick, easy thing that we can do every week or so. Curriculum-based measurement, Ames Web, Dibbles, FastBridge does that really well. Again, that those aren't rich data. They're not supposed to be rich data. All they're supposed to do is tell me going up and reading, and they'll do that very well. The problem is a lot of these publishers will tell you their test does all of this, and I don't buy it. So I'll pick on MAP for a few minutes. And I do a lot of work with MAP. They're good with NWA. They do good work. They have awesome psychometricians. I endorse their stuff. It's good. But they also will tell you that the NWA MAP growth. Now I don't know if they finally listen to me or I'm gonna take credit for it, but I'm just gonna take credit for it. They finally do have tests that are designed to do more diagnostic work, which is great. Because they used to tell you, take a look at your NWA map, and STAR does this too, by the way. In Renaissance Learning, good work, good people. They'll look at it and say, okay, well, your kid scored low on the strand that measures phonemic awareness. So they need a phonemic awareness intervention. Or your kid scored low on the strand that measures vocabulary. Here's the problem with that. Those tests are based on what's called item response theory. So it's possible, and sometimes probable, depending on the age of the kid, that the kid subtest that score is based didn't include a single item, or at least very few items, that actually measured that skill. So sometimes, your kid who's older scored low on phonemic awareness, or a kid who's younger scoring low on a more advanced skill, they may have taken a single item that addresses that skill. So those subtest scores are not reliable enough for individual kids. They are for groups. A group of classroom teachers, a third grade team sits down, looks at their map scores and says, wow, our kids are low on phonemic awareness. We better do something. Fantastic, awesome. I will applaud that. What I'm saying is they're not reliable enough for individual kids. The overall score is yes. If the fourth grader, their map score is low, they struggle with reading. I'm confident of that. But if fourth grader scores low on one strand, I don't know if they're really low on that strand or not. So don't get too hung up on that. They also will tell you can use to monitor progress. Now they've since developed a tool that does monitor progress, but like STAR and MAP, I don't love those as progress monitoring tools. They're not sensitive enough to growth and it takes too long to give. Okay, let's say they show growth if you give it once every 6 weeks, which is probably a pretty good estimate. Well, once every 6 weeks, I don't want to wait 12 weeks to have 2 data points. I want to be able to make decisions much more quickly than that. So that's why I collect data often, once a week or every other week. So we have to make sure we're using the tool for the purpose for which it was designed. And that seems elementary, but we do it all the time. Actually, let me say it more clearly. We don't do it all the time. We frequently use tests and assessments for purposes for which they weren't designed. Now, let's take a second. We can do it in the chat box. It's hard, I know, for some of us to follow, but I want everyone to see it. So I don't want to do a poll, but let's go ahead and put in your chat box, please, what your school uses for screening. Okay, just type it in real for reading. Just let's focus on reading thing. What does your school? If they use nothing, which I doubt they do because you're required to by law, but if you're somehow still using nothing, go ahead and say that. Good. Okay, lots of MAP, lots of STAR, DIBBLES, Ames Web, DRA, MAP, STAR, DIBBLES, Easy CBM, STAR, DIBBLES, NWA. Oh, FastBridge, good. DIBBLES, MAP, awesome. Okay, so a lot of the big ones that people tend to use. So I'll tell you right now too. I'm still watching as you're posting them. I'm on the FastBridge research board, but I don't get paid for it. So use FastBridge or don't, I don't care. It doesn't affect me at all. But I'll tell you that it's a well-researched tool. It's a good one. If I were to rank order FastBridge, Ames Web, DIBBLES, I would put FastBridge first, Ames Web second, DIBBLES third. Easy CBM is another one that's free, and I'm not sure where it fits in that hierarchy, but probably pretty close to Ames Web. It's a really good one to use as well. Okay, good. All right, so you basically most of you are using one of the main common screeners. Good. So this is a study we did, and I'm gonna what's the free screener? There's lots of free screeners actually. So DIBBLES you can still get for free, even though it's been purchased since now Acadians. They still have the free version at the University of Oregon's website. You can download and use for free. I don't know if you can use I think you have to pay for the data management system. Easy CBM it's called, and that's one word, Easy CBM, EASY CBM. If you just Google that, it's also from the University of Oregon. It's also been purchased, but there's still free versions online. And again, you got to pay for the data management system, but the tool, if you have a data management system that works already, the tool itself is free. So there's 2 free ones that are pretty easy to get. So this is a study we did, and we looked at the Fontes and Pinnell. Now, none of you mentioned Fontes and Pinnell. Yes, I'm sorry, CBM stands for curriculum-based measurement. You know, in special ed, we love our TLAs, our 3-letter acronyms. So if I use one without telling it first, please ask as someone just did. Thank you so much for doing that. So I studied the Fontes and Pinnell, and the reason being is really my research revolves around what's an instructional level. And so whenever something comes out that measures the Fontes measures instructional level, I tend to study it. So I'm sitting one day and I hear Fontes and Pinnell assesses instructional level. So I went and bought it, and it wasn't cheap. I wanted to study it. So as I'm reading it, and it says, and by the way, I've done 3 studies on this, 2 that look more at the instructional level. This is the screening. But the reason I did this study is this. In the manual, you open up right there on the first page, Fontes and Pinnell benchmark assessment system can be used to screen kids to identify reading problems. Oh, okay. Let's study that and see if it can. So we did a study with 900, these are 2nd and 3rd graders. I'm sorry I don't have younger. These are 2nd and 3rd graders. And we have 2 screeners, the Fontes and Pinnell, the F&P, and oral reading fluency, the CBMR, this is Ames Web. Our criterion is the MAP. I'd like to use the state test, but most state tests are so poorly written. State tests are not written for psychometric reasons, they're written for political ones. So most state tests don't give you very reliable data. I have not studied or looked at the Montana test. I can't tell you how it fares. but most state tests are not very good. So we use the measures of academic progress as our criteria, use the end of the average range for scoring in the at-risk range or not. So let's look first at the Ames Web data. We published this in Reading and Writing Quarterly, by the way. Okay, so we had 646 kids who did well on the map. And of those kids, 501 did well on the Ames Web measure as well, which is 78%. So think of that like a grade. That's a C+. Not great, but certainly acceptable. Then we look at 322 kids who did not do well on the map. 276 of them also did not do well on the Ames Web measure, which is 86%. Much better. That's a B+. That's good. And I'm willing to accept a few of these as long as I don't miss any kids. We still missed 14% of the kids who are struggling and the measure missed it. So these measures still aren't perfect and you have to take steps to make sure you don't miss kids. But I want to see a high sensitivity. I want this to be high. So that's fine. Those are acceptable. Overall correct classification, 80%. B-, acceptable. Not fantastic, but acceptable. Now, let's look at the F&P, the benchmark assessment system. 556 kids did well on the map. Of those, 367 also did well in the F&P, which is 66%. Ooh, what's that, D+? D? Not great. But look at the kids who didn't do well. 290 did not do well on the map. Of those, only 90 did not do well on the F&P. And I'm using the F&P's criteria. So they say by beginning of third grade, you should be an L. I made that up. Only 90, which is only 31%, which is among the lowest I've ever seen. Overall correct classification for the F&P was 54%, which means I can buy this test for thousands of dollars, train my teachers how to do it, spend 20 or 30 minutes per kid, or take a quarter, and you'll get it right just as often. I'm not bashing the F&P. I kind of am, but not really. The other study I did showed that, one of the other studies showed that kids who are struggling readers, the F&P overestimates their reading skills pretty substantially. So they're reading from a J and they're a J, but they can't read the J. We saw that 2/3 of the time. But that's not the point of this. The point of this is that this test was not really designed to be a screener. So when you look for screening measures, and I'm probably preaching to the choir here because nobody listed this measure, but I want you to really point out to be sure to use the data that are designed for screening. The F&P was not designed to be a screener. They call it the benchmark assessment system. Why? To make money. I'll be cynical here. I don't know if it's to be true, but I assume it is. That people are big into screening now. Let's call it the benchmark assessment system so that they have to, so then more people will buy the test and use it for screening. Actually, the thing that's cool about the F&P, if any of your schools use it, is at the back of it are a whole bunch of little measures, diagnostic measures, and they're fine. They're really good. Most people just get too hung up on that individual score. I would argue this is true for the DRA as well. Just sitting as me as the interventionist, if I have a kid I'm trying to work with, one of the first things I'm gonna have them do is read to me from graded material. So if they're a third grader, let's hear how well they read a third grade level text. Absolutely. I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing the score. The score tends to be fairly unreliable, and we see lots of errors. We published we computed the standard error of measure for the Fontes Pinnell. It's ±2. DRA about the same, by the way, ±2. So if a kid's a J, why did I pick J? That's a hard one. Their score is somewhere between KL and what? H? Yeah, H, I, J, yeah. So somewhere between an H and an L is their true score, standard error of measure. And so if a teacher says, well, my kid was at an H, now he's up to an L, isn't that great? I don't tell them no, but it's kind of within the standard error of measure. So no, it's not that great. It wasn't designed to be a screener. So we really have to take a look at what's designed to be a screener. I'm not sure I won't ask this. I'll just talk about this. It won't take long. How much time do we have? We're good. The Shea scale. Shea-Witt's dyslexia screen was published in 2016, I believe, and it is written by Sally Shea, who is a dyslexia guru. Like, she has done way more to help kids with dyslexia than any of us have, pretty much. And she developed this screener, and it's being purchased pretty regularly. It's being used quite a bit. Well, okay, let's take a look at it. So we looked at population with dyslexia. So my colleague Amanda Vanderheyden and I looked at these data. I'm going to explain what they mean. They published sensitivity of 0.73 and 0.70. So just to refresh your memory, if that's not familiar with you, that's this column. You want to see, you don't want to miss any kids who are struggling. Okay. Oops. So their sensitivity is 0.73 to 0.70. It's a C minus, close to acceptable, but certainly not great. And Amanda would jump up and down and yell at me describing 0.7 to be acceptable. That's pretty low. So then we took the estimated population of estimation of the percentage of population with dyslexia. And those estimates vary widely. We searched the literature, found the lowest we could find was 5%, the highest we found was 17%. The highest that was like published in an article. So based on that, we did some calculations, and I won't explain all these to you, I'll just get to the point, which is if we identified 100 kids as at risk for dyslexia, between 66 and 88 of the kindergartners, 100 per grade, and 46 and 77 of the first graders would be false positives. There'd be an error. And we'd still miss 2 to 7 kids per grade. So we have all of these false positives and still have 2 to 7 false negatives. So that's just not a good measure to use. And so we studied it further, and I'll show you why I say this in a second. We looked at now we're using these are younger kids, this is K through second grade. And now we look at phonological awareness. So we gave these kids the comprehensive test of phonological processing. It's not the same, it's not the same, sort of. It's the same model as the dyslexia screening, the Wyatt, sort of. But the one in it's based on the same idea, but the Shea scale is a rating scale. You give it to the teacher to fill out, which is not true for the Wyatt, I don't believe. If I'm wrong about that, feel free to correct me. Phonological awareness, we used the comprehensive test of phonological processing. So we pulled all these 100 kids and gave them the C-top. And we gave them the Shea scale as well. The teacher filled it out. Here's what we found. So among the 48 kids who were not at risk on the C-top as our criterion, 27 of them were not at risk on the Shea scale, which is 56%. Ooh, that's not very good. But now among the kids who were at risk, according to C-top, only 18 were at risk with the Shea, which is 35%. Overall classification, 45%. So literally, you flip a quarter, I said previously, flip a quarter, get the same results. Here, you're better off to flip a quarter than to use the Shea scale. This is not published, by the way, nor it's submitted right now, so it's under peer review right now. But then we looked at the Dibbles, and now we used composite because I don't love a composite score, but for screening, it's probably the one to use the best. So the Dibbles composite versus the C-top, 50 kids, so still had only a 66% identifying who was a good reader. So that's still pretty low. But the 91 kids who were at risk according to C-top, 46, which is 90% roughly, were at risk on Dibbles. So again, I'm willing to accept this as long as we get this. That's a little low. I'd rather see a little higher. Overall correct classification, 78%, still a little too low, but certainly better than the Shea scale. The point being, there's all this pressure on schools to adopt a dyslexia screener. And schools are spending money to buy Shea scales or something like that. And my point is, if using Dibbles, that does a better job of screening for dyslexia. If dyslexia is a deficit in phonological awareness, which it's defined as, then Dibbles did a better job than the Shea scale or many other scales that exist. Probably the data you're using right now do a better job of identifying dyslexia than anything else you could buy. Now, if you're using Dibbles, you want to upgrade, I would call it an upgrade to FastBridge or something, sure, but your data are probably just fine. But if you want to go buy something like the Shea scale or something else because it's a dyslexia screener, you're probably better off to just stick with Dibbles, AimsWeb, or FastBridge. But you have to make sure you use the data the right way. So I'm going to make one more comment on screening, then we'll talk about using the data the right way. I know in the state mandate, as is most states, rapid automatized naming is listed frequently by explicitly stated. You got to measure RAN. How do you measure RAN? Well, here's a meta-analysis by Arojo et al. in 2015. So there's tons of studies on this. 13,000 kids, 55 studies for letters. Letter names correlated with later reading at 0.51. Pretty good, pretty good. Naming numbers, 60 studies did that, 0.48. Pictures, 32 studies did that, 0.35. Colors, 25 studies did that, 0.33. By far, the best measure of RAN is letter naming. Now, here's the only problem. Yes, a marked increase in people thinking we need dyslexia screener and parents taking kids to private screening. That's really unfortunate, and Montana's not alone. It's really unfortunate. The best rapid automatized namer for reading is letters. Letter naming fluency is better. Here's why any of those others even exist. It can't be a measure of rapid automatic naming, if the kid doesn't know what it is. So if the kid can't tell you that's a T and that's a G or whatever, then it doesn't function as a rapid automatized naming. It functions as a, do they know the letter names? So if for preschoolers or even fall kindergarten, that's why you got to use things like pictures, colors, shapes, numbers, because they don't know the letters yet. Midway, about midway through kindergarten, or certainly any kindergarten in first grade, when most of the students know their letter names, letter naming fluency is by far the better measure of rapid automatized naming. So if you're working with kids and screening for dyslexia and you want a rapid automatized namer, letter names pretty much the best one to use. If you want to do it with right away in kindergarten and they don't know the letter names, then it doesn't work very well for that. Consider pictures, colors, shapes, or whatever other measure you might use for that. But rapid automatized naming is measured best for reading with letter names. All right, it's about 10:30 your time. Let's take a break. When we come back, we will talk about how to look at the data, a few more comments of lining up with dyslexia guidelines, et cetera. And I'll start with that, recapping. And then we'll come back and talk about how to use the data, et cetera, for screening decisions. So let's see. So it is 11:30 my time. So let's give it a 15-minute break, okay? That should work for everyone. So I'll start again at exactly 10:45, right? Yeah, 10:45 your time. I'm messing up the transposition. All right, we'll take a break there. Thank you. Sorry, we both probably paused at the same time. Thank you, whoever did that. So before we get started up again, let me make a couple comments. Some folks have mentioned the rapid automatic namer from Arkansas, and that's colors, which is fine. There's two things I'll comment on. Number one, again, it can't be a measure of RAN unless the kids know all those colors. So if they don't know the colors, you can't use it as RAN. And it's designed K2. So you're better off to use letter names more than likely, certainly end of kindergarten for sure, I think. But if the kids know their letter names, that's still the better screener than a color one. And somebody mentioned norms. I agree, norms are a problem. And there are published norm reference tests for RAN that exist. Marilyn Wolf has the one that's probably most commonly used. And they're fine. They cost money. They're not too expensive, but they're not cheap or free. So so I struggle to find norms too. And if I find some, I'll be happy to share them. And what the Arkansas does is it says just rank order your kids and pick the cut point. So highest to lowest, we're going to say the lowest 20% is our cut point. You could do that with any measure. You could do that with any measure that you might have. I don't love that approach to identify deficits. Because if you have a class, if you have a school in which all your kindergartners are low, then you're only going to look like 20% of your kids are having a problem. So I'd rather have some sort of criterion. It wouldn't take much to compute to figure out a criterion to use that to predict later reading growth with your school data. That'd be better than just rank ordering and picking the lowest 20%. So I agree, it is tough to find norms, and you can purchase them. They exist. There's published tests for this, but they cost money. They're not terribly expensive. I didn't look it up, but they're not too bad. All right. So we've talked so far about some different screeners, different purposes of assessments, et cetera. Let me see. Well, it's a long one. I can't. I'm sorry. You can't send me a long text. I can't. Or chat. Please break it up into smaller ones, and I'll respond. Okay. So far we've talked about RAN and different types of screeners we can use, and making sure we're using the data for the measure for the purpose which was designed. So is this actually a measure that looks at screening decisions? And we see all the time in schools that we tend not to do that. So now let's come back to our dyslexia guidelines, and we have to measure these areas, right? So what I'm saying is first sound fluency and phoneme segmentation fluency are measures of phonological awareness. Those are the ones that use in DIBELS and AIMS of, et cetera. Now, some of you might say, well, those are fairly lower level phonemic awareness skills. I want to get to manipulating. So I would argue, though, that in kindergarten, certainly kindergarten, these are probably going to be okay. Most of the kids who struggle in phonemic awareness in kindergarten are going to struggle with some of these more basic skills. But certainly it's easy. I'm going to show you a measure in a few minutes that gets to some of those more, gets to manipulating, et cetera. And certainly you could use those. But for screening, to measure phonological awareness, this works pretty well most of the time. Decoding, nonsense word fluency, I already talked about that. Word attack measures, they're good measures of decoding. Letter sound fluency can be used as an indicator of decoding skills as well. Rand, I'm going to argue letter naming fluency. If you want to use something different, names, or I'm sorry, pictures, colors, or something like that for kindergartners when they first start school or preschoolers, sure. And then fluency, reading fluency, Dibbles calls it DORF, which has got to be the worst name in the history of testing. But oral reading fluency, reading curriculum-based measurement, RCBM, CBMR, however they phrase it, those are direct measures of fluency. Comprehension, CBM talk about maze, but I don't love maze. I don't think it's a measure of comprehension. If you know what it is, if you don't know what it is, don't worry about it. It's where you delete every like third or fifth word and put 3 choices in. Kid circles the right choice. Easy CBM has a comprehension measure that's free. STAR and MAP are both basically explicit measures of comprehension. So easy CBM is the kid reads a fairly long passage and answers a number of comprehension questions. And it's designed to be a tool to assess comprehension. It takes a while to give. You can't measure comprehension in 2 minutes. It does take a while to give. So if you're looking for a screener that you don't want to buy STAR or MAP, easy CBM is an option as well. Well-researched norms available. Again, you have to pay for the data system, but I think the material itself is free. So really, I would again argue that most of us have the data in place. We just got to maybe think through how we use the data. Kindergarten needs to be screened with phonemic awareness. I've mentioned first sound and phoneme segmentation fluency. Maybe now would be a good time to show you this website. So let me do a new share. Okay, so this is, when I was at the University of Minnesota, we created an intervention program. And I'll tell you the story, it won't take long, I'll be really fast, it's purely for entertainment purposes, but we were in, when I was in Minnesota, we created the Path to Reading Excellence in School Sites. So the Target Corporation lived just down the road. Target Corporation's headquartered in Minneapolis, and they were down the road from us. And they called us up and said, Matt, we are currently giving away $3 million a week, $3 million a week in charitable contributions. And we've been focusing on cultural things, theaters, museums. We want to focus on literacy. We don't know where to begin. Can you help us? Lori Hellman and myself kind of laughed, like, yeah, we'll help you spend $3 million a week. Started meeting with them. After about 6 months or so, they said, you know what would it look like? What would an intervention program look like that at the end of 3rd grade, all kids would be fluent, would be, proficient readers? So we went away, Lori and myself, and brought Jennifer Comas from Special Ed and the Minnesota Reading Corps, which I already mentioned, and developed this Path to Reading Excellence in School Sites. And went out to Target Corporation, did this big reveal, big thing at their, by the way, Target Corporation headquarters makes our technology, makes our smart boards look like chalkboards. So awesome. So it's so much fun presenting this. Afterwards, we went, this is great. How much would it cost to build it? And we told them, and they cut us a check. Said, here, go build it. They gave us $8 million to build this intervention system, this approach for kids with reading problems, and to build it in 6 schools and test it. It was awesome. It was fantastic. By the way, if you've ever written grants, that's how you write a grant. That'll never happen again. That was fantastic. So it became really popular. And now, so we started off, we were doing these interventions with kids in the schools. And so we made a 3-ring binder of all the intervention scripts, put them in there, gave it to all the teachers. Teachers loved it. This is great. The union called us that night. Said, we heard you gave out 3-ring binders to all your teachers today. Yeah. You're not allowed to do that. It was explicitly stated in the collective bargaining agreement, we were not allowed to give out 3-ring binders to teachers. I don't know why. I think maybe because principals do that a lot. Principals downloaded stuff, put it in binders, gave it to teachers. So we said, okay, well, what if we spiral bind it? We have some grant money, we can afford that. If we spiral bind it, is that okay? Sure, that's okay, that's allowed. So went and got, I promise this is true, went and got all those binders back, took them out, 3-ring, bound them, spiral bound them, put a cover page on it. I'm sorry, I keep my hands on it. It's within arm's distance. I know it is. I just can't see it right now. Handed out to all the teachers, and they loved it. It was great. So we thought, well, as long as doing that, let's put a little more information on it. So we did, made it look a little more professional. Threw it up online, said, you know what, you can download this for free, or you can send us $25 to cover cost of printing and shipping, and we'll send it to you. The first year we had maybe 2 people download it for free, maybe maybe more than that, but not many. Something like 2,500 people sent us $25 so we could print it and send it to them. So it did really well. So we decided to make it a website. So now it's a website, and it still costs money. It's $100 a year to belong to it. Now, I'm not endorsing it. I get no royalties from it. I don't get paid for this at all. I just help build it. So I think it's good. But I'm going to show you right now. Under tools, you can go to Phonemic Awareness. And by the way, you just buy one program for your whole school. And let's go to assessments and download the Phonemic Awareness inventory. So here is a quick little, it takes just a few minutes to do. You test initial sounds, final sounds, segmenting, blending, and manipulating. And if the kid fails any one of these levels, they don't demonstrate phonemic awareness. So it's really quick. It's criterion reference, not norm reference. Don't need norms. And we've done several studies with it. But it's a quick, easy thing. It does cost, like I said, $100. Now, I have emailed this and to CSPD. Did I say that right? CSPD? So I'm willing to share this, and we can get that to everyone for free. It's a quick, easy thing to use. So if you want to have another screener for phonemic awareness, that's certainly something that could be considered. Okay, let me go back to my slideshow. All right. So now let's talk about how to use the data. Is there oh yes, there is, by the way, a free version of this. So you can show your superintendents and other teachers this. Yeah, I don't know what you mean, free preview of what, but of the press thing, yes, there is. And yeah, since I give you that, I'm gonna give you a couple other things for free. Just don't tell the press I did that. They won't care. I wrote it, so I mean, I'm the one who developed that measure, so I think it's okay. All right, so so for screening, kindergarten start with phonemic awareness. Yes, first sound fluency, these Dibbles type measures, things are fine. The quick phonemic awareness or assessment, the phonemic awareness inventory, which I just showed you, that's a fine screener as well. We use that also for older kids. So I've got a 3rd grader. Gosh, does this kid have phonemic awareness? You know, there are. I was about to say no, that's not true. There are very few norm reference measures for phonemic awareness for a kid in 3rd grade. So I can give him this phonemic awareness inventory and a quick measure to see if he struggles with phonemic awareness. Screen with decoding for 1st grade. You got to have decoding as part of your screener in 1st grade. 2nd through 5th grade, I'm talking elementary here, I would start with CBMR, Ames Webb, Dibbles, the oral reading fluency. I would start with that. Accuracy, I'll come back to that next Friday. Accuracy is a really good indicator. If the child is struggling with the fluency, the rate, and their accuracy is low, which I would argue is 93% 1st through 3rd grade, 95%. So they read more than 93% of the words correctly, more than 95% of the words correctly. Yeah, someone just asked, are those diagnostic assessments? Yes, we'll talk about that next week. You can use this diagnostic quite a bit too. But that suggests they're struggling to break the code. So a fluency score, an accuracy score, man, those together, really good picture of what's going on with the kids. And then screen with comprehension for high school, middle school with MAP, STAR, and those kids who score low, give those kids a CBMR. So phonemic awareness for kindergarten, screener, heavy decoding screener in 1st grade, reading fluency with accuracy in 2nd grade, high school, middle school, comprehension, STAR, MAP, and those kids who score low, give those kids a CBMR. And I follow that similar process to use diagnostic. But if your requirement is to screen in these areas, and your screening I just described, you're meeting the spirit of the law. Now, I've worked with lots of states, and I will admit that I haven't talked to the people in the state here in Montana who wrote the law. But here in other states as well, I've talked to the departments of ed about this and said, this is what I tell them. It doesn't meet the spirit of the law. And they'll say, yes, exactly. Now, once the law is written, and these are all still new laws, they get challenged in court eventually, and then the court decides how to actually implement it. So will the court come back and say, well, you didn't give a measure of RAND to every single kid, then you're not meeting the law? I don't know. But the departments of ed have said, yeah, this is what we have pictured. We want to see schools doing good screening and using those data to identify what kids need. So someone asked about the recording. I'm not sure what we're gonna do with the recording. I'm not sure how we're gonna store it or get it or what we're gonna do with it. We'll figure that out, but I'm happy to make it publicly available. All right, now spelling. Spelling gets brought up a lot in the laws as well. What do we do with spelling? Spelling is a good Measure. It's a measure of decoding. If a kid can, no, let me say this right. I put it here on purpose. It's not a good screener though. So be careful about that. Kids with low decoding skills are usually bad spellers. But there's a bunch of kids who are bad spellers who decode just fine. So it's not a good screener. Like if you see a bunch of kids who score low on the screener of spelling, you're going to probably over-identify kids who struggle with decoding. But if the kid's already identified as a struggling reader and they have poor spelling, they'll probably struggle with decoding as well. So it actually serves better as a diagnostic tool. So if I screen with some other measure and I want to see how are they doing with decoding, I might look at spelling. And there's lots of things that already exist that you may already have. Words Their Way. Now, Words Their Way is an interesting program. My colleague, Lori Hellman at the University of Minnesota is one of the authors, co-authors on one of the books in it. But it has a developmental reading inventory, developmental spelling inventory, and it's good. So if you are using Words Their Way, and I'm not sure if that's a program that you use, I haven't seen it right here. I'm really bummed I can't put my hands on that press me because I know it's sitting at arm's reach. This right here. So this in it, there's a developmental spelling inventory, which by the way is also available online for free. So if you Google Words Their Way developmental spelling inventory, you get a copy of it. You can get it for free. It's an involved way to interpret spelling, but it can, if you kids are struggling reader and you want some indication about decoding, this is not a bad source of data to get those information if you're already doing it. I'm not recommending going to buy it just to have that spelling inventory, but you can get it for free online. But if you're already using it, it's not a bad tool to get some more data. Words Their Way. WTW is Words Their Way. Okay, so Google Words Their Way spelling inventory, and you can find it for free online. I'm not sure what materials comes with it on that free version, but the tool itself does exist online. All right. So step one, get a good reading screener. It should be reliable, quick, easy to use. You know, the CTOP is what I use as my criterion all the time, comprehensive test of phonological processing. It takes a long time to give. I'm not going to give that to every single kid. I'm going to start with something else first, something quick, easy, reliable, preferably something that informs instruction and cheap. You don't need to spend a ton of money on this. So okay, that's not a good sign. That's all right, I'll exit out. It's okay. So let's go back to my to the websites here. So I have a YouTube channel that I like quite a bit. I developed this. It's just my YouTube channel. So to find it, you just search Matthew Burns, comes up. And I put a bunch of videos on there. And real quickly, the newest thing I'm doing is I find a study that's of interest, like which is better, continuous reading or repeated reading, which is the social studies. Can we apply science of reading to social studies? How do you teach letter sounds letter sounds to young kids? So I'll find a cool study and I'll contact the author and interview them for like 10, 15 minutes to tell them about the study in terms everyone can use, and I video it, throw it on my YouTube channel. I've got 3 out there. I've got several more I'm going to be putting up in the near future. And then just other things, but I want to point you in direction to 2 things right now. We also have a bunch of videotaped interventions. So I model how to do interventions. And we have some videotaped assessments, how to do, I say videotape, that makes me sound old. Video, no one uses tape anymore. So we have some videos here of interventions and of assessments. So the one I plan to show you, maybe I need to show you this whole thing, but I'll get it started here, just so you can see what we do. Lately, I've been taken to showing people how to do assessments, etc., online, because we have to be able to do these assessments virtually because of the pandemic. So let me make sure my sound is shared. Okay, so I'm going to start a video if a couple people I can't see any of you, so I need to know if you can hear it or not. Hi, I'm Matt Burns from the University of Missouri, and we're here today to do some more reading assessment and intervention. And I have a special guest with me today. Many of you might know him from Jeff the Memester fame, the famous YouTuber. So this is a son of one of my colleagues, and he agreed to help me out on this as long as I plugged his YouTube channel. It's called Jeff the Memester. So it's actually really funny. He has one video where he eats ghost popcorn. It's pretty funny. But with me today is Carter. Say hi, Carter.
Hi.
Carter, what grade are you going into?
7th.
Going into 7th. Wow, that's great. So I'm going to model how to do a measure of oral reading fluency. Now I'm trying to do is show curriculum-based measures that can be done virtually. And anything that doesn't have a student material, you probably can't do maze, where the kid has to sort of read it and circle answers. But something like this, where he reads and I follow along. As long as I have the PDF online and I can share my screen, we can do it just fine on Zoom for free. And that's what we're going to do today. Okay? All right, Carter. So as I mentioned, you do explanation. Floating still? Give it just a second.
No, it's there.
Good. You see, I've shared it online, and I printed the hard copy. I'll follow along. Dibbles has on their website some recommendations to modify administration procedures to do it virtually. But it's basically this: don't show it to them until you're ready to start. So don't show it to them until say, okay, I'm going to show you a passage, explain everything, put it up, and then start. Okay. I don't think. Over here, please read this. If you get stuck, I will tell you the words so you can keep reading.
Okay. Them around the house. Most service animals are dogs, but can also be cats.
That 1 minute, it looks like Carter, you read. And I don't usually count like 155 words, 158 words total with 3 errors, so 155 words per minute. Now, this was so that's how you would do that. And then I do it with younger kids too. Let's see, where are you, AJ? So you'll see a little guy here named AJ. He's the star of several of my videos, and he is hysterical. So if you ever sit around bored and just want to laugh at a little kid being funny, I recommend watching these videos. Where are you? Where it is? So same, I guess I need to show it. Same kind of concept. Hi, I'm Matt Burns from the University of Missouri Assessments. And I have AJ helping me again, and he is having fun being on mute, and I'll let him just sit there and have fun for a second. Today I'm going to show you how to do dibbles. I'm going to show you the dibbles. I didn't put him on screen because he's doing this. The letter naming fluency probe that they use. It's available for free online. So, say hi.
Hi.
How old are you? How old are you, AJ?
5.
5. Okay, good. Okay. So let's listen carefully. Now, for those you want to see, I just printed the student.
I can't see you.
Now, can you see it, AJ?
Okay, yeah, I can see it still.
Good. All right, AJ, here are some letters. I point with the pointer on the computer. Here are some letters. Tell me the names of as many letters as you can. Not yet. It's really simple to do. Now, the only word of caution I'll do, I'm not going to run the whole thing, you don't need to watch and read it, is when you do it this way, oops. When you do it this way, whoops. There. When you do it as I just showed you, it brings into question the norms a little bit. So when you screen, if you have to screen virtually, you're going to want to be careful to not make errors. What this could over inflate the score. They could your score artificially low. So when you're doing screening, you're doing it virtually, like I've just showed you. Look at multiple sources of data and take into account the margins. If the cutoff is 120, I'm making that number up, and the kid's scores a 60, well, don't worry about it, the kid's low. But it's 120, the kid scored 115, you gotta be really careful. So the closer the kid is the margin, or if the cut point's 120, the kid's 125, then look at other data and try and figure out if that child is actually exhibiting a difficulty or not. But if they're really low on this, then they're probably really low. This really does bring into question some of the norms we use. All right, so get a good screener. You can do it virtually. Now, the next step is to consider the classroom. Because remember, the hallmark of dyslexia is not poor reading performance. It's poor reading performance in the face of effective reading instruction. Most kids who struggle to learn to read don't have dyslexia. Poor reading performance should signal the need for screening. So again, I've already mentioned PRESS. Here's the website. Actually, you can just Google PRESS and it comes up as well. Again, I get no money for talking about it. I get no royalties. But let's talk about this. All right, so let's say this is a third grade or second grade. We got second grade classroom, so we screen with CBM, Ames Web, Dibbles, and we see these scores. So any kid in the red or yellow is a struggling reader. Want to see greens. So I would ask schools, does this look familiar? I mean, this is probably a lot of schools in which we work. A lot of kids are struggling readers. So let's take a look now, come back to those original data, and let me do something real quickly here. I'm going to mute all the microphones. So I've muted all the microphones, but you can unmute it. So if you want to speak, go ahead and unmute it. Great. All right, so here's some data for, again, second grade, I think it is. And we have 23 kids. Any kid below a 91 is a struggling reader. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 out of 23 kids are struggling readers. That's not unusual, by the way, 12 out of 23. Now, if we're doing this to develop intervention, are we going to pull 12 out of 23 kids and run a small group intervention? No, we're not, for several reasons. Number one, logistics. You don't have the people, you don't have the materials, you don't have the place, you don't have the space. Number two, whatever we're doing is not meeting the needs of these kids. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to compute the class median. And you can do this with any measure, star map. Star map will give you the class median. You have to go in and tell it to do that. It usually gives you average. Problem with average is with less than 30 kids, the outliers can really throw off the score. So you got one kid reading 200 words a minute, a couple kids reading 0, can really throw off that average. So I use median because it's not as susceptible to outliers. But if you have a class of 40 kids, then you can probably get away with it. So I get the class median, and the median is really simple. It's just the middle score. So in this case, if there's 21 kids, so you want 10 above, 10 below. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Middle score. So all you have to do is rank order it, get the middle score. If it's an even number, it's the average of the two middle scores. So in this case, 60 and 64, the average of those two is 62. So you find the class median, compare that class median to the benchmark standard. So in this case, the data were collected in the winter, and the class median was 87. The benchmark standard was 91. If the median is below the benchmark standard, you have a class-wide intervention. Question number one, is there a class-wide need? The answer in this case is yes, we have a class-wide need. 87 below 91, class-wide need. In this example, the median is 92. The benchmark is 101. We have a class-wide need. It's below the benchmark. Too many kids are struggling. In this example, 62. The benchmark is 90, although it doesn't look like it's 90 here. Well, something seems wrong there, but we have a here's a hint. If the median score is in the red or yellow, you have a class-wide need. Okay, did that work on that previous one too? No, it wasn't, not color-coded. So, and now let's look at some kindergarten data. Now we have to talk about kindergarten. Kindergarten is difficult. I still think the most difficult grade to assess and intervene is first grade. We call it the first grade problem. Man, if you out there who are first grade teachers, you're all wonderful people, but wow, there's a special place in heaven for first grade teachers. We talk about that it's hard. There are very few measures in first grade that demonstrate reliability. And we always talk about saying, well, the measure doesn't have reliability. No, it's not that the measure doesn't have reliability. The kids don't have reliability. At about second grade, kids start to use consistent approaches to learning, like to memorizing stuff. For example, they'll say it over in their head, or they'll start to do something consistently at about the beginning of second grade. So first grade, it still varies so much that they can look so different day to day. So the kids aren't reliable. So first grade's a problem. Kindergarten has a different problem. Yeah, okay, there are a lot of benchmark goals that vary in numbers. You use the one that was developed from the assessment you're using. So AimsWeb, use AimsWeb. If you're using DIBELS, use DIBELS. If you have something else and they don't have published norms, Google, I'll put it in the chat box, Google Hasbrook and Tyndall. And Tyndall, T-I-N-D-A-L, I think it's one L. They have a study, they've done a number of them now, every year or every few years, they develop these norms of thousands and thousands of kids. So based on more generic measures. So if you're using something other than DIBELS or AimsWeb or FastBridge that has its own published norm, then they have their published norms that you can use as well. But it's only for oral reading fluency. That's all they have. So here we have a group of kids, and these are kindergartners. Now we screen them we may screen them in fall, but we'll get winter data. Now here's why. I'll come back to this point a little bit later. We've done this a number of times, and we found that there are a lot of kids who identified as struggling readers in fall of kindergarten for whom we do no intervention, who by winter look just fine. Because they come in low because they've never had instruction. So we get them instruction and they do fine. So I'm a little hesitant to look at winter data. I'll come back to that point, or fall data for kindergartners. I think you have to. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. But certainly at winter, you want to look at it. So these are the winter data. That's why my asterisk there. This school used letter sound fluency as their primary screener. I still think letter naming fluency is actually, when you look at all the data that predict reading growth from kindergarten, letter naming fluency is the score that predicts reading growth better than any other. So I'm still probably going to start with letter naming fluency as a screener, then look at phoneme segmentation fluency and letter sound fluency. So those three together is what I'll use. So the median here is 14. The benchmark criterion is 20. So we have a class-wide need. We have a low group of kids. When we see a class-wide need, we have to do a couple of things. I don't know if that'll let me go there, so I'll do it manually. One thing we have to do is, if we see class-wide needs, we're going to get our teachers meeting in a professional learning community and talking about reading instruction. So if that's the case, I'm going to recommend you look at this website. It's the IES What Works Clearinghouse Practice Guides. Now, the What Works Clearinghouse, in my opinion, has been a little disappointing. IES is Institute for Education Science. It's the research arm of the Federal Department of Education. So IES is one thing they've done that's great is they've gotten together researchers about a bunch of topics. And they get these researchers to look at all the research and make recommendations, but they write it in terms for teachers. And there's some really, these are all really good. There's a bunch of them up here. There's one on using technology, preventing dropout in secondary schools, teaching secondary students to write. But here's some ones relevant to this conversation. Foundational skills to support reading for understanding in kindergarten through third grade. Where'd it go? Improving reading comprehension in kindergarten through third grade. And there's one down here. Here it is. Assisting struggling readers with reading response to intervention, multi-tiered intervention in primary grades. There's a whole bunch of improving adolescent literacy if you work with middle school, high school, ELL. There's really, really great stuff. And they're good. So if you click on one, let's click on this one here. Foundational skills. You get a free PDF. And you can hit right here, hit the PDF and it comes up, but it shows you right here. There's 4 recommendations. It tells you strong or moderate evidence. And if you click on it, let's click on this one. It takes you here. Come on. Man, that's slow. There. And it's very clearly written for teachers, step 1, step 2, step 3, how to do all that. So it's a great resource. So if I see a class-wide need, I'm going to get my PLCs talking about good core instruction. And I tend to download these practice guides and I get them working on them. Now that's going to take weeks. I'm also going to start a class-wide intervention. The class-wide intervention I use most is based on PALS. If you haven't heard of PALS, it's a wonderful tool. It's out of the University of Vanderbilt University. It's from Vanderbilt. They have kindergarten PALS, first grade, second grade, 2nd through 6th, middle school, high school. And what's great about it is if you turn, it's not a curriculum, but it's a bunch of lessons and you can turn and it tells you what to do. It has all the materials you need. It's a wonderful program. It's cheap. It's not free, unfortunately. But I think it's probably like $45 for the manual, and the manual comes with a video, how to do it. It's really, really easy. It's black line master on purpose. You can photocopy it, etc. It's great. It's on the What Works Clearinghouse website. It's a research-based intervention. So when we see a class-wide need, we implement a class-wide intervention. We get our teachers talking about core instruction, and then we hit class-wide intervention. We bought PALS in its press model. So we were at Minnesota. We saw class-wide needs in all these classrooms at the winter benchmark. And so we went and bought PALS for all the teachers. We said, here, do PALS. And the teachers pushed back and said, wait, you want us to do 20 to 30 minutes a day for 26 weeks? No, we're not giving that kind of time. So we kind of panicked, went back to our room and said, okay, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? So we took what they do and thought, what matters most? We decided what matters most for upper grades is partner reading, paragraph shrinking. So we built an entire intervention system for that. Now, let me say one more thing though. So we went to all our teachers and said, here, do PALS. First grade, second grade, third grade said no. 1 grade said yes. Kindergarten. God love kindergarten teachers. They went, yeah, sure, we'll do it. Sounds great. Show us how to do it. Oh, looks awesome. When can we start? It was every time I've done this, the kindergarten teachers were the ones that say, sure, we'll give it a shot. It's great. But we had to do something different for the older grades. So we built 2 systems. For kindergarten, I still use KPALS. I still recommend it. I have it right here. They've updated it since this version recently. So it looks a little nicer, but it's kind of the same thing. If you can read, you can do it. Every teacher I've ever given this to in kindergarten has loved it. So we use KPALS for kindergarten, first grade and 2nd through middle school, we do something different. So what we did is we decided to take PALS and decide what really matters. And what matters was partner reading, paragraph shrinking. So we do is this. If we see a class-wide need, like we see here, we cut the class in half. So forgive the language I'm about to use, but I don't know how else to explain this for demonstration. So we have this kind of lower half and upper half, okay? So we want to create heterogeneous dyads. So I don't fold the group, so the lowest of the low is with the highest of the high. I slide it. So the lowest of the low is with the lowest of the high. The second lowest of the low, the second lowest of the high, down to the highest of the lows with the highest of the high. We group them that way. So we create a bunch of dyads. And every dyad gets a folder. Every dyad gets a folder. And in the folder, you have team A, reader 1, reader 2, team B, team whatever. Reader 1 is always, always, always the stronger reader. So reader 1 in this dyad of student A and student K is student K. Reader 1 in this dyad of student J and student U is student U. It's always, always, always the better reader, the higher reader. So reader 1 is the better reader. So reader K, reader 2 in this, reader 2 would be reader A. A lot of letters in that area kind of rhyme. It's throwing me off. So we say, okay, kids, partner reading time. They know reader 1's job is to go pick up the folder. The folders are kept somewhere in the room. Reader 1 goes and picks up the folder. Reader 2 finds a place to work. And we tell them we do it that way. So there's no arguing. You just, reader 1 goes first. Reader 1 gets the folder and they go first. Now, in the folder are a couple things. On this side are the rules, and the things like, you know, do your best reading, keep your voice low, try your best, help your partner with reading, that kind of stuff. And then we also have an error correction procedure. I've lost the chat box. I'll try and get it back. Where's my chat box? All right, well, for some reason I can't see the chat box right now. I'll try and get it back. So if you're chatting me and I'm not responding, it's because I'm not seeing it. I'm sorry. All right, so, and then the other side, so then we have the rules and then an error correction procedure I'll talk about in a second. But on this side are a bunch of passages written at reader 2's instructional level. That's important. Reader 1 is the better reader. Reader 2 is the lower reader. Those passages are written at reader 2's instructional level. However you define that for this activity is fine. I tend to use Lexile a lot. So what I'll do is I'll go to readworks.org. If you don't know what readworks.org is, I really encourage you to check it out. Readworks. See, good. Readworks.org. It's a wonderful tool. It's free. It's all free. There's thousands of passages. You have to sign up for it, and they'll send you emails and stuff, but it's free. There are thousands and thousands of passages on there, and you can sort them by type, by grade level, by Lexile, you name it. So if I have a student who reader 2 is at a Lexile of like 200, I'll go find a bunch from 150 to 250, print them, put them in the folder. It's that simple. Okay, so reader 1, we have a bunch of passages written at reader 2's instructional level. Okay, kids, partner reading time. So reader 1 goes and picks up the folder. Reader 2 finds a place to work. They sit down. They open it up. They pull out the first passage. Reader 2 always, always, I'm sorry. Reader 1 always, always, always goes first. Reader 1 always, always, always goes first. And we tell them that's because there's no arguing about it. Just reader 1, you pick up the folder, you go first. Reader 2, you go second. So reader 1 will sit down and read this out loud while reader 2 follows along for 5 minutes. Then after 5 minutes, they stop. Okay, kids, time to switch. Reader 2 goes first. Then reader 2 reads the same thing reader 1 just read. Okay, so reader 1 goes first, then reader 2 reads the same thing. This is fluency building, repetition. I have a video of this in just a few minutes. It's a brief video in just a few minutes. Then, after we do that for 5 minutes each, then after that 5 minutes, the next 5 minutes, reader 1 reads again, but this time they pick up where they left off. So if we read this passage in 5 minutes, we pick up here for the next 5 minutes. Pick up here for the next 5 minutes, and reader 1 reads out loud, but after every paragraph, they stop and do paragraph shrinking. I'll explain paragraph shrinking in just a second. Do that for 5 minutes. And let's say they read reader 1 reads this paragraph, this one, this one, this one. Okay, time to switch. Reader 2, your turn. Reader 2 picks up where reader 1 left off. And reads this. After every paragraph, stop to paragraph shrink. The first part of it is fluency building. So you read over and over again. The second part is comprehension. So it's important to get the kids to do that paragraph shrinking. They're probably going to struggle with it at first, but that's okay. Really push them to get that. Paragraph shrinking is this. Name the most important who or what, tell the most important thing about that who or what, and say it all in 10 words or less. And we have kids put their fingers down. They say, okay, the paragraph is about Thomas Edison. He's the most important who or what. The most important thing about the who or what is he grew up on a farm, but he didn't like that. He wanted to work with machines. Thomas Edison didn't like farming. He liked working with machines. And then they move on to the next paragraph. It's really quick and simple. Let me show you the video. Oops, I have to go back to. This bigger so I can see it. Okay, all right. I can skip the beginning part of it.
Tyler. Page H.
So each kid she's calling up is reader one for that dyad. And by the way, we use passages. Oh, good, my chat box has suddenly reappeared. I don't know why. Okay, someone asked how you do this during global pandemic. I have a video of that in just a minute. Good. Okay. So each, I don't know why my chat box has suddenly reappeared, but I'm happy now. So she was calling up reader one. So reader one comes up, gets the folder. We use passages. I've tried books. I'd rather have the kids read books, but it's been a disaster every single time. The only time we use books is if it's first grade and they have those little small books that can fit right in the folder. That's the only way we ever do it. Otherwise, we use passages. Passages are nice because you can control the text much better. A passage is written at certain lexile much more accurately than an entire book is, unless the book is really short. All right, so get their folders and sit down.
Raise your hand if you're ready for me to start. You ready? Yep. Reader one, go ahead.
Raphael and Antonio agreed. After dinner, they cleaned up. They put the food high up in the tree. Nobody wanted the bear to come back. It got dark fast. The Sylvias looked up at the stars. There were thousands of them.
Go back to where reader one was.
Chapter 8.
Air was faster. Raphael grabbed the pepper spray. Then he tripped over a rock. Raphael dropped the pepper spray. Works, said Franco. That stuff.
Okay, so we teach them error correction too. We tell them to say stop. That word is what word? Good. Now go back and read that sentence again. We practice that because the kids at first they'll start yelling. They'll go, stop. So you got to practice it. Stop. That word is what word? Good. Now go back and read it again. This is at reader two's instructional level. There shouldn't be a lot of errors. Reader one should be able to correct. Reader one should know all the words and be able to correct any words. If neither kid knows the word, they raise their hand. The teacher comes and does the standard error correction I just showed you. Oh, by the way, you'll notice this dyad and other dyads are using books. That's because these books are really, I don't know if they're short or not, but they're small. So she's put them in the folder. So that's the only time I ever use books. It's when the books actually fit in the folder.
That stuff works, said Franco. No sign of the bear.
What is the danger of these huge amounts of rain? Floods, hurricane floods, cause tremendous damage, loss of life.
Oh, okay. So we used to do retell. We found that doesn't really help. So you skip a minute retell, you save some time, and it doesn't really help anything, and it works just as well. So I don't do the 1 minute retell anymore. But I do want you to see. There it is, paragraph shrinking.
Bubble shapes. If you dip any wire frame into soap solution and pull it out, the wire edges will be continued with bubble film.
Stop. The word is connected. What word?
Connected.
Good job. Go back and read that really good.
The wire edges will be connected with bubble film. The film shrinks, revealing the smallest possible surface area within the structure.
No, you can read. No,
No, I think that's okay for me. Okay. When dip wire frame into soap, into bubble actually. Bubble. The film goes around. I think that's it.
I could go.
So when the second reader does it,
And then one kid.
and then kids were done. Once we're
Okay,
done, they get two
so
picks up early, puts it away. Again, we practice that procedure as well. Okay. So here's the error correction that we have them do. We teach the kids how to do it. Works really well. That's what I just showed you. I'll come back to this. Oh, that's okay, it didn't work anyway. I guess I'll talk about it now. So we for about the first day, all we do is practice the procedure, going to pick up the folder and sitting down and doing a little partner reading. The second day, we start modeling how to do paragraph shrinking. So that starts really probably the third day, and you still have to model it, especially with younger kids. You still have to model it. I keep modeling. Here's my scientific criterion. I keep modeling it until the kids get it. There's always going to be one or two who don't. That's okay. This intervention is not designed to help every kid. It's designed to help kids for whom their reading problem is not something like a dyslexic situation. It's just they need a little bit of a bump. So there's always going to be some kids. So someone asked, is this recommended for older kids? Yes. We've studied this through 8th grade, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. So a couple of you asked about pandemic and can do this virtually. So we had some schools do it virtually. They simply create a Google Drive for each diet, and they put the PDFs in there. And they put the rules. So here also down at the bottom, you see the error correction, the paragraph shrinking reminder, how to do that, and the rules. So instead of picking up your folder, you just open it up to here. And then I'm going to show you a brief video. Oops. There we go. I'm back to my YouTube page here now. Here's a woman in Michigan whose school did this, virtual partner reading paragraph shrinking. So let me show you her video in which she explains it. This is
opportunities to respond.
Hi, this is Matt Burns from the University of Missouri, and I'm really excited to have someone here to speak with me. This is Jane Sturgill, who's Director of Special Education with Fraser Public Schools. And Jane's been part of an effort to move some interventions to a remote virtual environment. So she was generous enough to give us a few minutes to kind of explain what they did. So thanks, Jane. Appreciate it.
Sure, yeah. So as Matt said, I am the Director of Special Education in Fraser Public Schools, which is in Metro Detroit. And we started the year off, much like most of our surrounding districts, in a virtual environment, and recognized that we needed to come up with a way to do some class-wide intervention. And our elementary schools are K-6. We're a district of about 5,000 suburban area outside of the Detroit area. So what we were kind of challenged with initially was trying to figure out how to keep high opportunities to respond for our students in a virtual environment without the use of breakout rooms that would be difficult to monitor for our teaching staff and our interventionists. So essentially what we had come up with was a model that gave our teachers a little bit of training on how to do partner reading and paragraph shrinking, and then modified it for more of a whole group virtual environment. In this scenario, our teachers were always the first reader, and then the students would be the second reader in the group. So it was really more of a whole group than a small, typical partner activity that we would do. We wanted to make sure that the students were trained on how to do error corrections. So that was something that we modeled for the teachers, and then they trained the kids. And it was up to the gen ed teachers kind of how this looked in their world. However, we did suggest that they spend about 10 to 15 minutes a day of their asynchronous small group or large group time, depending on the teacher. And the teacher, again, was always reader one, and they could do a popcorn style where they rotated the second reader in the class, or some of them chose to do one student for that whole 10, 15-minute block. We kind of let that be up to them. Some teachers actually wanted to use the chat feature and have that error correction done, so it's a little bit more interactive. We had a few teachers want to utilize something like an exit ticket as well for that, so that they could make sure all the students were engaged, even if they perhaps didn't have their camera on during that lesson. So one of the things in our district, we do not require the students' cameras to be on during the asynchronous lesson. They have to have it on just to show they're there, but then they can turn it off. And as part of the training piece, because we're all virtual, so we didn't have an opportunity to bring our teachers together for training. So we had a recorded slide deck with narration, and then they would pause throughout the video to answer questions in a Padlet. And some of those questions would be things like, where might you find text? And so some teachers were going to use science or social studies material. Some teachers wanted to use their big books. We did this with grades 2 through 6. And the teachers had lots of other suggestions too. Scholastic News, Readworks, Epic, Mayan, I mean, you name it, they came up with sources of text. We just asked that it be high interest and developmentally appropriate. We weren't necessarily as concerned about the reading level, because the teacher was always going to be the reader, and we knew that they would have an opportunity to increase the vocabulary of their students regardless of their actual independent or instructional reading level. For our younger students and some of our classes that maybe had lower readers, some of the teachers wanted to kind of scale that down. For our upper L students, some of the teachers wanted to consider having the paragraph shrinking done with a writing, so the students had to summarize that paragraph in a sentence.
I'll tell you, I've never studied that using the writing version of paragraph shrinking, so I can't endorse, advocate, whatever. Shrinking idea, but I worry it might take a little too much time.
That they wrote, and again, they could use the chat feature, exit tickets, or even just a piece of paper, and that they held up. And that's kind of how we did it. Even some of our more tech savvy teachers were looking into how to generalize this through a blog with Seesaw or Flipgrid. So lots of creative ways that we've been trying to modify for our virtual environment.
So the advantage of this way, which makes it work, what I heard you say, is if you've got 20 or 25 students, and say 10 general reading levels, you could do 10 groups or 5 groups and group them up that way, instead of having 12 to 13 groups.
Right.
So so it could be 1 on 3, 1 on 4, 1 on 5. And it's 1 on 5. The teacher would read first, and then the students would take turns reading after that, either randomly or everybody read.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. That sounds great. And how did the teachers like it? How'd they respond?
Some of the teachers really took this and ran with it. Those teachers that seemed to have the most success were teachers that were already familiar with partner reading and paragraph shrinking. So last school year, before the extended closure began, we had piloted this out in a few buildings and a few grade levels just for those teachers that were interested. And those that did take that opportunity at that time seemed to really have a better understanding of how it worked and how they could adapt it for a virtual environment.
Great, cool. And we'll stop there. I have to go back in. All right, so that's how you do it in more virtual. She did it, they did it there, they mentioned the whole class. I like the idea of having it smaller groups than that, because the popcorn idea is that way everyone has to pay attention, but they don't get to read it themselves very often. I'd rather have them read it as well. Someone mentioned some choral work. I think that would be fine too, actually, get the whole group involved. I don't love the idea. I mean, I like the idea of popcorn, because then they have to read, because they may have to go, and they don't know if they're going to go or not. But I want them to have the practice of actually reading it aloud as well. So, but it can be done virtually, and it worked well in this district. It's worked well in other districts as well. So what we do is, for 2nd through 8th grade, we've studied this through 8th grade, and we basically did exactly as I just showed you, partner reading, paragraph shrinking, even with the 8th graders. With the 8th graders, we tried different ways to get them to count to 10, other than put their fingers down. We gave them checklists, etc. And they just on their own just put their fingers down. So I thought this might be a little too sort of babyish for an 8th grader, and no, it seemed to be just fine. Kindergarten, I still rely heavily on K-Pals, but 1st grade we do build a word. Let me if I click on that and see if it opens. Oh, I'm gonna regret that. Did it open? Okay, it opened. So let me share that screen. So this one's a quick one. I can jump ahead.
All right, good morning, boys and girls. Let's go through the letter sounds. What sound
So again, this is the first grade class-wide reading intervention.
does this letter make?
I gotta stop that. Don't let the students say "ka," "duh." Don't ever. I actually have had the chance of observing a lot of kindergarten classrooms lately because of the virtualness of it. I could do it, and I hear a lot of kindergarten teachers say, "This is D." D says "duh." This is key. C. C says "ka." No, duh. Because if it says "duh" and "g" for G, then dog is "dog." No, it's "dog." So really practice that. In fact, when I teach the undergrad literacy methods in special ed. We have a test where you have to record yourself saying every sound, and I grade you on it, and you keep doing it until you get 100%. Yes. Quick and quiet. Yes, exactly. All right.
Very good. Now we are going to practice writing and reading words that have a long vowel sound. All right, how do we spell the word same? S-A-M-E. Very good. Let's do the word came. Came. All right, and how do we spell the word came? C-A-M-E. Very good. Let's play a little knoll against the class. Did you practice last night? I did. All right, let's read our word list. Starting with this word. Look at the word. What's my word? Same. Good job. How about this word? What's my word? Came. Look at the word. And what's my word? Cave. How many points did you get? Let's count it. 5, 10, 11. You did a really good job with that. Now, what I would like you to do is erase your boards and please write a sentence using the word make. And we remember that we capitalize the first word of our
Just a little bit to get to the next part of it. So she write the sentence, which is fine. And they read it to each other, so they're engaged. And then, let's see.
your list and your story.
Times like I just started to tell you. So then each dyad gets a word list. And they have there's a couple ways we can do it. They go back to their desk and read the word list to each other. And we do contests. So we do it for time it. And so you can read the word list the most frequently. So you can read it, practice it multiple times. We also will give them magnetic letters and let them go back to their desk with a whiteboard. If you have a whiteboard, by the way, we go to the dollar store, although you can get whiteboards now. Like all my doc students get a couple things when they start the program with me. They get one of my books for free, and then I give them a whiteboard. This is like, you get this for like $1.50. I'm not exaggerating, at Target for really cheap. It's a small one, but you can get it for cheap. But if that's cost prohibitive for whatever reason, I go to the dollar store and get cookie sheets for $1. And you can write on those and erase them just like a whiteboard, and the magnets stick to it really well too. So I have magnetic letters. I won't get those out. And we give those to the kids, and we let the kids build words. So, okay, now keep the A the same, and then make up words. So it doesn't have to be a real word. Just make up put the letters in and read the word. So there's different ways you can do it. The kids like the magnetic words quite a bit, but you gotta be careful if you let the kids make up words. I was the first year in the fall, I was showing them how to do this, and I sat down with the kid, the principal's there watching. I said, okay, make up a word. And the kid put the letters F-U-X and started to say it. And I stopped him. Okay, good, next. You kind of watch out because they're kids and you never know what they're gonna do. But they really enjoy it. That's fun. So that's the first grade version of our partner reading, of our classified intervention. So again, kindergarten is K-PALs, 2nd through 8th grade, we've done partner reading, paragraph shrinking. 1st grade, build a word, which is what we call that. So here's what we found in doing this. We found that in the first classrooms we did this in third grade, the pre-intervention medians were 81 to 87. And just, oh, I forgot to mention this. We did this for 10 days. I forgot to mention this. So the teachers said, you know, we showed them to do PALs and they laughed at us, except the kindergarten teachers. And it's just, okay, you know what? We're going to go back and here's partner reading, paragraph shrinking. Try this for 10 school days. Just do it for 10 school days. We'll come back, we'll get some data, we'll talk about it, we'll see what worked, what didn't work, and we'll make some changes. Okay, fine. About half the teachers agreed to that. So after 10 school days, we collected the data and look how much the medians went up. From 81 to 104, from 87 to 115. Remember, 91's the goal. We did not expect that. So we started using 10 school days. That became our serendipitous time frame. We said, okay, fine, 10 school days is now our time frame. Somebody just mentioned in the chat box, it's a long one, so I can't read the whole thing, but the book Goodbye Round Robin has lots of other ideas. It's actually sitting right over there. I just won't go grab it. I use that book all the time. So if you're looking for other ways to creatively get the kids to read without using things like popcorn or whatever, or regardless, there's lots of really interesting ways to do that. That book is by Tim Brzezinski, I believe. I could be wrong about that, but it's really quite good. So now let's go back and look at so we use 10 school days, and that's our standard. With older kids, we do middle school, and I would argue maybe even fourth, fifth grade, but we still try 10 school days, but certainly middle school, we use 15 school days. So I also can see which kids need help. This kid went, let's see, class meeting 87, 113. So below 91, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 kids. What's 20% of 5? 20%, good. 20% of 20. 20% of 23 is 5. It's 4.6. I'll round up to 5. So 5. So we always say 80-20, 80-20, 80-20. 80% of the kids proficient, 20% of the kids struggling readers. Have you ever seen that in practice? It's very rare. It happens, but it's very rare. After this 10 school day intervention, we got it. We got roughly 20%. Now there's a couple of kids right at 91 or 92, so we'll certainly talk about them, but we now know with some confidence who our struggling readers are. And those are the kids for whom we deliver small group intervention. And now we've taken that number of kids down from 10 or 13 out of 20 or 23 to 5, roughly 20% of the kids. In kindergarten, letter sound fluent. Now, again, I'll tell you, this was done in the winter. This is the criterion, 20 sounds per minute. I just showed you these data. It went up to 23. Now let's see who needs help. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 kids after the build a word intervention. 5 kids. That was it. We consistently, and by the way, the number's almost always 5. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I mean, there could be 30 kids, there could be 15 kids. I swear after the intervention, that number needing help is still roughly 5 almost every single time. Again, remember though, like there are some kids who are low and still need help. This is not going to be an intervention for every kid. This is the intervention for these kids, right? For this kid, the kid who's this kid, right? This is the intervention for a kid who needs a little bit of a boost. And so we weed those kids out is basically what we're doing. That sounds like a harsh way to say it, but it's basically what we're doing, right? We're weeding those kids out. I'll come back to that point with older kids in just a second. Oh, Oppitz and Brzezinski, thank you. Authors for Goodbye Round Robin, thank you. Now, this is the growth we saw. This dark red here is how much they increased winter to spring. Now, we did this winter to spring because I don't want to give the whole story behind it, but we didn't do classified intervention because I had an army of research assistants. I had 24 doc students in school psych, special ed, and curriculum instruction. So if I had a classroom with 12 out of 23 kids who need help, I said, okay, fine, just go. And we ran interventions for all those kids. And we saw was all the kids did really well during the intervention time, and their data looked great. But then we did the winter benchmark, and the number of kids who increased, the number of kids who are proficient didn't go up. And we panicked. And I realized, I thought, oh my gosh, I've been saying this for 20 years. Without good core instruction, nothing else matters. So we went back, and this is when we started the classified intervention. So here we see the growth of winter to spring. Actual growth is the dark red, kindergarten, first grade, third grade. The lighter red is how much they were supposed to grow up based on national norms. So you see all of our kids, even though all the classrooms, I should say, even though they started off below the benchmark criterion, grew at a rate that blew away the growth they're supposed to get according to national norms. So remember I said half the teachers said, sure, we'll try it now. That's 10 school days for 20 minutes a day. We still had a number of teachers say, no, I don't want to try it. And so we can't force them, it's a grant, but now we have a quasi-experimental control group. So this is the growth from winter to spring for the no classifier intervention. So kindergarten, you'll see, this is why kindergarten is such a perplexing issue, that they, without intervention, still progress at a rate that you would expect them to. First grade did not, second grade did not, third grade did not. So for the kids who got the classifier intervention, the gap between good readers and struggling readers got smaller at least. But for kids who didn't, the gap got bigger, except for maybe kindergarten. Now I see two things. So kindergarten's a problem. Kindergarten's a problem because it's tough in fall to predict which kids are really struggling readers because they haven't been exposed to reading yet. So I standardly only screen beginning of winter in kindergarten, but I'll come back to that point in a few minutes. The other point is, I think the teachers shared. I think I can tell you I saw it happen, but I didn't document it or anything. And plus, the nature of the study we didn't really control it. But this is photocopyable, and I know the teachers shared it. So I can't say for sure they did or didn't, but I think they did. So that might be why we saw more growth in kindergarten. Kindergarten teachers are generous. This is, remember, we had classifier interventions were implemented in 10 of the 21 classes below the winter benchmark. 9 of those 10 classes were still above the benchmark in the spring. In the control group, it was the reverse. Only 2 of those classes were above the winter benchmark, the benchmark in the spring. And now let's look at kindergarten. There's a slight mistake here because I accidentally left the teacher's name in, and I just noticed right before we started, so I had to white it out. So this again, kindergarten. Now this is the change from winter to spring. I'm sorry, fall to winter. I'm sorry, fall to winter. This is fall to winter, classified, no classified. So without intervention, without classified intervention, the kids did just about as well, made about as much growth in kindergarten. In winter, we see a little bit more difference, but in kindergarten, you know, it's tough to tell in the fall who will be the struggling readers. So I'll come back to that point in a second. What I really recommend is we don't want to wait until winter to screen our kids per se. I would wait to do classified intervention, but I certainly would try and identify really low readers right away in kindergarten and take some steps right away. I'll come back to that in a few minutes as we wind up. All right, so we also did this with older kids. I'll do this real briefly. We did it with 4th and 5th grade. We've done this through 8th grade. We did science contact. The superintendent said that we couldn't do reading interventions with these kids because they had to focus on science because their science scores were low. So we did what I just showed you, except we went to readworks.org and sorted by topic and looked at the scope and sequence of the curriculum and found reading passages that matched up to what they talked about in science that day. Did this for same, you know, everything else is basically the same, except here our variable is the science maze. We created a maze, took science probes, omitted every 3rd word, every 5th word. Every 5th word, put in 3 choices, a near miss, a far miss, the right answer. Kids had to circle the right answer as they went. Everything else was the same. Here's what we saw. In the 3rd, 4th grade classrooms, this is the baseline. The little blue line is how much they're supposed to go up based on national norms. That's how much they actually did go up, blew it away. Same thing in 5th grade. Here's where they started. That's how much they're supposed to go up in 2-3 weeks based on national norms. This is how much they actually did go up. Just blew it out of the water. And then middle school, we did this in Buffalo, New York, with a middle school there that was in a pretty poor part of town. I won't spend a lot of time on this. We saw a nice big jump in reading fluency. Oh, here we did science and social studies both because it was a block schedule, and they went back and forth between science and social studies every day. Saw a nice jump in reading fluency that exceeded the control group, but look at the jump in science and social studies content knowledge compared to the control group. Even among kids who were English language learners. We did nothing different for those kids, just implemented it as I just showed you. I have a student studying that to see if there's a better way to do partner reading with kids who are emerging bilinguals. And then the concluding point is this. Okay, now let's look back at those data. This is the map. If we use the map as our criterion, and we can debate if that's a good one to use for this conversation around dyslexia or not, but we'll use it here because it's a well-constructed test. Among the kids, if we use that as our criterion in the pre-intervention CBM data, the diagnostic accuracy is basically 70%. C-, not great, but probably maybe acceptable. Once you did the classifier intervention, the diagnostic accuracy went up to 91%. Let's look at these kids. You know, this kid went from, let's find a good one here. Let's find a good example. 83 to 106. That kid's not dyslexic, I promise. This kid went from 75 to 92, 87 to 105. You know, these are big jumps. Now this kid went 49 to 47. Okay, I'm worried about that kid. He had some decent support and he still didn't improve. I'm worried about that kid. And guess what? He's low on MAP. This kid started low and is still low. He made nice jumps. He went up 27 words in 2 weeks. That's amazing. But he's still low. He still needs support. I don't think he's dyslexic, but he still needs intensive support. This kid, 38 to 47, okay, I'm a little more worried about that kid. 80 to 82, I'm a little more worried about that kid. 51 to 70, still getting support, but that's a nice big jump. So these data help make a really informed decision about which kids we need to really dive in more deeply and consider for dyslexic identification and intervention. I would argue a classified intervention is your first step in identification because, well, good screener is your first step. It's your second step because it increases your decision-making accuracy. So in conclusion, watch those early warning signs. Absolutely. Screen the multi-gate system. Kindergarten, I don't start systematically screening all kindergartners till winter. But if I have those warning signs, I've already talked about family history, problems with phonemic awareness, then I'll pull those kids and do a phonemic awareness assessment. So I may pull some of those young kids and do something intensely with them right away, day one. But those kids I showed you before that were kind of borderline, I'm probably gonna wait and see what happens with instruction for them. Use a reliable measure that's developmentally appropriate. Consider classified interventions as part of the screening process. How much time do we have? We are pretty much out of time. Maybe I'll stop there, and we got about maybe a minute or two left. People have been asking questions as they go, so I really hope I've been asking questions or answering questions as you go. The moral of this story is, good screeners, classified intervention, those are your first steps to really identifying accurately kids who struggle with dyslexia. And if you're using good screeners that assess phonological awareness, fluency, et cetera, you're probably meeting the state guidelines as long as you're doing some of the things we talked about today. I'll stop sharing. I can see on my clock here, it's 12:58, so I will happily hang out for a couple of questions if there are any. Next week, and just chat, throw your questions in chat and I'll respond to them. Next week on Friday, we'll dive into the intervention side of it. So now we'll talk about how to identify what the kid's specific need is. Is it decoding versus fluency versus whatever? And then address the deficit there with some specific interventions I'll show you. If we have time, we'll get to how to intensify the intervention. I can't promise we'll get to that. It's a lot to get through in 3 hours. I'll try, and we'll be very task efficient next time. We were this time too, but we'll be more so next time. And really get to, okay, I have a kid who's really struggling. How do I help that kid? And we'll get to that as well. Okay. I look forward to next week's conversation as well. All right, it is 12 o'clock. I'm seeing lots of comments. Thank you very much, but not a lot of questions. So I think we'll go ahead and end there. Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll stop the recording.